Hey, I'm Bailey.
I'm Michael.
And I'm David.
And welcome back to Facing the Gates podcast. Today, we are here discussing, we went to church yet again. We went to a Presbyterian church. We went to Grace Presbyterian. Last week, you heard the interview with Pastor Trent.
No, last week was Pastor Mark.
No, last week when this comes out.
Oh.
Yeah.
Fuck.
Yeah, good job.
My brain's all fucked up.
It's okay. Just pretend like I know everything, because I definitely don't. But pretend like I do. All right, anyway, David didn't go with us because he had his Roni shot. And
it was awful.
He was knocked out.
It's over with.
So
I'm safe.
Yeah, so you didn't hear the interview yet, but what was your first impressions when we walked up to the church? Because me and Michael were there yesterday, so we can talk about that in a minute. But what were your first thoughts when you walked up?
It's like, well, because especially when we used to live near that area, we used to drive past and it's like, that's an interesting looking design and everything. Because for people that don't know where it's at, it's kind of a straight hall, but then off to the left, it's kind of a pyramid structure. Mm-hmm. I mean, I love that it's different design. It's not your typical four walls and a stage.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with it, but nothing wrong with that. Whatever suits your needs, use it. Mm-hmm. But it's kind of cool that it's a different idea of a design, and it's not necessarily a church design, but it's also not just a regular building.
Yeah. Well, that was one thing I was going to say is not to trash on the Heights, but I could at least tell this church was a church.
Yeah, because we pulled into the wrong parking lot. I was like, hey, Bailey, church is behind there. Because you could obviously look at the building and go, oh, that's a church.
Yeah.
Like,
it was, I was very serene and peaceful, because there's a little bit of like trees around and
very quiet.
Yeah, it's a fairly small church. I don't know how to describe the architecture. Like David said, there's an archway, there's two buildings, there's a sanctuary, red carpet, red seats, cushion, nice chairs. Like, the chairs are pretty good.
Good lumbar support.
Yeah.
White ceiling with the wood going through to create kind of that point at the top, and then a main support beam down from the point.
Yeah. They also had their lights were cool. They were like kind of cylindrical lights with a cross on them.
Yeah. I've noticed a good chunk of churches use those lights, but they look nice.
Well, also, you can tell that the building is a product of its time, because it was built up when that area was built up. Mm-hmm. And so you could tell some things were based to look older, and then some things were just product of their time. Like the ceilings and the exterior, you could tell a little bit, but it looked very much like a place of worship.
Yeah. I was going to say, it kind of looks like a hybrid of, like, you could tell it wasn't like super ancient, but it also wasn't super modern either. It was kind of like a blend of the two, somewhat.
The way to describe it would
at
be
least
like,
from the outside.
Think of Grandpa's, like, study, where he'd sit in front of a fireplace, light a pipe, and just sit there and ponder. Mm-hmm. That's kind of the vibe I got, especially after sitting in his office talking with him and then going to the service today. It felt very much welcoming due to our area we're in. It didn't feel foreign.
Right.
But you could tell this place was a special place.
Yeah. So we walked up today. As I mentioned, it is a fairly small church compared to the one we went to last week. It was quite different. I think there was maybe about 30 or so people there.
Yeah.
And when we walked in, we were greeted by a couple people.
Good. Surprise. Like a decent amount of the congregation.
Mm-hmm.
Just as inviting
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah. So,
I guess that's more so towards Southern hospitality at its finest.
Yeah.
true.
Well, also, Pastor Trent spoke upon being hospitable and things in our interview yesterday and even today. I think he mentioned something about welcoming. And so, yeah.
Yeah. So, a couple people came and talked to us a little bit. Obviously, there's not as many people, so not as many people came out to us. But, we were not called out in the middle of the service like we were last time, which is I'm okay with. David's okay with it.
Yeah, well, it's whatever way. If they want to announce it,
yeah, you don't have to draw attention. We don't have to be like, we have podcasters in the audience.
But if you want to, feel free to. That's your choice. We're at your place.
Yeah, this one I felt it was much more like we're actually visiting a church, and the last one was like we're visiting a church, and also we're internet celebrities, but we're not.
We're special guests.
Yeah. So, I mean, I felt like we were actually legitimately visiting a church. Not that we weren't before with Heights, but there had been people who were talking about the podcast prior to us being there, obviously.
Yeah, though, with like Pastor Mark, especially with how excited he was about the podcast and the idea, kind of makes sense to share with everyone.
Which I'm not opposed to it either way. I'm just saying it's a different experience when a lot of people know about the podcast, and then you're going to a different church where basically no one knows about the podcast, as far as I know.
But onto the kind of big thing, especially with the kind of age group, they're being like, "Oh, a podcast." They might have been like, "What is that?" Yeah,
true. There was there was a little bit of a weird age gap.
Age disparity.
Yeah, because there was, I don't know, there's probably a good group of probably elderly-ish people, and then there's a couple younger people, but not very many.
A handful of small families.
Yeah.
And then like one or two probably our age.
Yeah, but so I mean, like, I'm not gonna say it's completely unhealthy congregation, but it is a smaller group, so you're going to have less of each people because there's less people, period. But yeah, I mean, it was still warming and welcoming despite the fact that there's not a ton of people there, and you don't need a ton of people, to be fair, to numbers aren't everything.
And to kind of tie into the different theological approaches, you could tell this where at Heights you could tell emotions, they let the emotions do a good bit of the talking, whereas this seemed more we're here to listen to Pastor Trent speak and use those words to guide us instead of even with the people and how they approach and things like that.
Right. So I would say this one, the Presbyterian Church, I would say is a little bit more. The one thing for the interview, I think Pastor Trent's answers were more intellectually stimulating, I guess. Not to say that Pastor Mark wasn't, he just tended to simplify things down because that's who he's speaking to, generally.
That's his demographic.
Right.
And more power to him if you can take something complex, break it down, and then kind of feed those kind of simple things into a long string of here's a complete story.
Yeah.
If it works, it works.
So, the service itself was much more, I want to say ritualistic, but I know that can be pejorative. I don't mean it in a bad way. It's just like, it's very structured, and it's
more like you would expect a contemporary church to have. The hymnals, prayer, a little bit of speaking, hymnal, prayer.
Yeah, I would say more of like a traditional church, because contemporary
has changed meaning.
Contemporary has the connotation is more like for example, Heights Church would be more contemporary.
Yeah, where I'm using contemporary as kind of like what people would think of when they're...
Yeah.
What we grew up expecting out of church. Yeah, it was very structured, very not leaning. You can tell...
there was a lot of Bible, which I think is a good thing. You know, they were...
A lot of Bible, a little bit of dry humor.
Yeah. There are obviously they do hymns as opposed to contemporary music, which I think, regardless of your music taste, I think hymns carry more theology in them. I think it's much more loaded with, like, here's the Bible put into a song, basically, with a hymn.
Yeah. And the way they're numbered, you can tell they're done that way, so you can use them after a point of reference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so...
More structured, more traditional.
Yeah, I would say it's definitely more traditional. They also have they did confessions of faith. He said he goes back and forth between the Apostles' Creed and the Nicene Creed, which I thought was interesting and cool because those are some of the earliest creeds that Christians formed. So I think it's cool that they have people recite that because it's important for people to know, like, what the earliest Christians believed and to continue to preserve that for the future.
Yeah. And just like with any theology, whether or not that's how you believe or feel, it's always good to preserve how others previous to you thought so you can learn from it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just history in general.
Right. I do like, as far as when he gave his sermon, he read a passage from the Old Testament, and then he read one from the Gospel. He read from 2 Kings, then he read from Mark, and kind of compared and contrasted the stories and showed some parallels between them. I thought that was really interesting because a lot of, at least churches that I've gone to, will be like, all right, here's like 3 verses that I'm going to read, and I'm going to expound upon that, and it might somewhat relate to that. It might not. This was much more like a Bible study kind of approach. Yeah. Like, this is what the historical context, and this is what these things meant. And
this is our key phrase.
Right.
Which today was, don't be afraid, believe, or something. I want to say that was it.
Go to Jesus, basically.
Don't be afraid, believe.
Don't be fearful, be bold in your belief.
Yeah. Because I remember the passage in Mark was about the woman who touched Jesus's garment, and
then
power
it goes
went out
on
from
to
him.
the young girl, the daughter, and he said she is not dead, she's sleeping.
Right.
And he also referenced the number 12, and kind of that repetition, because the lady for 12 years, and the girl was probably like 12 years old or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And
the correlations between those.
And I like that he brought up that with the little girl, there is debate on whether she was dead or not, but in the end it doesn't matter due to the over-looming story.
Because she's not, well, basically, whether she was dead or not, she's not dead anymore.
Yeah.
Is what he was getting at. But also, the reason there is debate around this is because a lot of times in the New Testament, sleeping refers to people who have died, because a lot of the times in the New Testament, there's spiritual death, which is you went to hell, basically.
Yeah.
And there is sleeping, which is the people who went to be with Jesus. So that's kind of the way oftentimes the New Testament uses life and death. Life is going to be with Jesus. Death is being separated from him. Yeah. Whereas our modern usage of those words is life is being alive, living, and death is what happens after that.
Yeah.
So there is a little bit of a disconnect
and
in the way we understand that.
Phrasing that Jesus used was kind of probably due to translation, a little open-ended, but I appreciate that he didn't shy away from that fact or try to shove something in there, and he let people know honestly.
There's debate about this.
Yeah, there's debate about this.
Yeah.
And no matter the school of thought, what matters is Jesus performed a miracle on this person, 12 years old, just like this lady. He performed a miracle. Well, he didn't perform a miracle, but a miracle was performed upon this lady who had 12 years of something to do with blood. I can't quite put my finger on that.
Some form of constant bleeding.
Yeah, something like that. And
I don't remember exactly.
Instead of delving on the details, he used the details, but didn't shy away that there may be some disagreements upon them.
Yeah. So he was much more. I think the way you put it when in the car on the way here is you said he was kind of much more like a teacher instead of a preacher. Yeah. Because in the modern sense that like people like preach at you instead of teaching you and instructing you, and that is, I think that's a good approach to have.
And when you open the hymn book, it had something about how preachers are the people appointed by God to teach. And I think the way we view that, especially with different traditions and denominations, it's viewed differently. And I kind of like Pastor Trent's approach, which is teaching. Yeah. And it felt more like you were sitting there learning instead of having an emotional experience. You were thinking and listening. Right. And then if emotion came, it came. If it doesn't, it doesn't.
Right. Yeah. So overall, it was much more structured. The hymns were balanced throughout the service. It wasn't like all the
it wasn't a wall of hymns.
It wasn't like all the music at the front end of the service and then the sermon after, and then that's it.
And then prayer, then go.
Right. It was like hymns and then prayer and then it would
tide.
Yeah.
Prayer.
Yeah.
I think there's 4 or 5 prayers.
And he would have everyone stand when we were singing or praying. The bulletin is very helpful for people like me who haven't attended their church. They have it written out, like there's an asterisk if you need to stand here, or there's a little, tells you what hymn numbers there are, so you can pull out the hymn book and figure out where it is.
Tells you where.
Yeah, especially with being such a small congregation, it's kind of harder to just read the room. But having that, here's what we usually do, here's the plans, here's kind of the lesson that we're going to be teaching about today.
Makes it less intimidating.
Yeah.
And
so I wasn't like, I mean, I was able to follow along partly because I came from a church that's somewhat like this. I would say this is a little bit more formal and a little bit more structured and regimented, which isn't a bad thing.
Yeah. And it could also be right now his demographic.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. But also, one thing I will comment on the past 2 churches together is both of these preachers seem very welcoming and willing to have a sit-down conversation with you. And that, to me, says a lot about a church, because it didn't feel intimidating to interview either of them. They were both seemed pretty interested in the conversations.
And they're pretty down to earth and willing to answer.
Even with our wordy dirds.
With our wordy dirds.
Yeah.
But I will say that is one thing that we I know there are some churches where the preacher is very intimidating to talk to, where you just don't talk to him like that.
Mm-hmm.
But these past two, you can tell that if you need to talk, they're there.
Right. Yeah.
And especially with a smaller congregation like Pastor Trent's, that says a lot, because he views it as a community and wanting to grow that community without giving up what keeps him, and his religion is religion.
Right. So I think we should talk a little bit about the interview also.
Yeah, especially since I haven't even heard it yet.
Yeah.
He could have just dropped the raw files off. No.
Oh, I haven't rendered it out yet. It's still on my laptop. But
She just left me the laptop.
I will say, I felt really at home with The Office.
oh yeah.
With all the books everywhere and the carpet and all that. It felt lived in.
Yeah. Okay, where do we even start with the interview? I kept thinking of different things. Was there anything specific you wanted to start with about the interview? Because I kept thinking of things, but I'm forgetting them.
First off, it was a very good intellectual conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And I can tell he really knows church history, and he's not just a teacher, but he's also a student.
Mm-hmm.
And talking with him about different people, like your Calvins, Lewis, etc. Kind of
Lutherans.
Well, I'm talking about schools of thoughts within Christianity.
Right. Okay.
And I can tell that he's done a lot of research and a lot of reading, and he cares about the history that the church was built upon, and he has an idea of the context which things come from.
That was the one thing I wanted to say was approach. The approach that the pastors take, both of them that we've interviewed so far have different approaches because they're trying to do different things.
Yeah, they have the same end goal of teaching and reaching.
They have the same goal,
yeah,
but the means by which the
means to the end.
Yeah. So Pastor Mark, he uses the music and speaks the way he does because of the audience he's trying to reach. Pastor Trent is trying to be the method with which they have the worship service is intended to be historical, traditional, and true and good worship, basically. And that's the aim of that worship. Which, not to say that one is bad and the other one's not, and it's just a different approach.
It gets you to the same end goal.
And, because we were talking about this a little bit on the way back, I don't think one is necessarily worse than the other. I think one might be more theologically correct than the other, but ultimately it's going to appeal to different people and different age ranges and different types of people. So at the end of the day, if somebody's in church, then they're in church, in my opinion, as long as they're not in a Mormon church.
As long as they're sitting in a pew
or a Unitarian church or something. Yeah.
Yeah. And I kind of feel the same way. One appeals to me more due to the type of person I am versus the other, but I'm not going to ever say one's right and one's wrong unless there is a very clear, this is bullshit moment.
Right.
But I will say, I can tell he cares, and they both care and are passionate about what they do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And like what, as we talked about Pastor Mark in his interview, because he has a large congregation, the works they can do can reach even more people, where the smaller works is, I don't know if y'all talked about that in the interview.
Oh yeah, we did.
But it's doing
the
the best you can reach.
Yeah, he mentioned, he's like, yeah, we kind of need to work on that, but we do what we can with who we have, it's just, it's more difficult when you have a smaller congregation, obviously.
I I have a lot of respect for that, honestly, because we all have things we can work on.
Yeah.
And that says a lot about a person being able to go, hey, this is where I feel we can do better.
Yeah. I liked how he did kind of take notes on certain questions and had more lengthy responses and thought out responses for some of them. That's kind of like what I would do when it comes to like the episodes.
As I told you, like hearing his sermon, it's kind of like if you preach for a little bit, at least how y'all talk about stuff, and like especially with you doing a lot of research and looking into like historical aspects as well. You should just become a preacher.
I don't know.
Just do it.
I don't want to be judged that harshly.
Hey, just do it the last two did. I don't give a shit.
No. I don't know. Let's talk about the Calvinism stuff, because we have had conversations about free will and those kind of issues. How do you think he handled? I'm asking Michael for people who can't. How do you think he handled the free will question? Because essentially, Calvinism is determinism, which means that God set up everything and determined it and preordained everything that's going to happen, and foreordained everyone who is going to be saved. I didn't get to the chance to ask him about double predestination, if God foreordained people who are going to hell also.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I think he tackled it in a way that made it a little... Say if I knew nothing about it, and I came in and was like, hey, what's this? He explained it in a very smart way, but you could still wrap your head around it and see how he thinks is coming through and how it makes sense to him. Even if I may not agree, I think he handled the question decently. But I also am not as knowledgeable.
It is a difficult topic, and it's complicated, and especially when you're in a position like him, where you are theologically essentially a Calvinist, and you have someone who may be asking you like why you believe these Calvinist things, which, like, you know, it
which can
puts you on the spot, and it can be difficult to answer.
And the idea of predestination is very defeatist at times. Yeah.
But now he was defending it, but I'm not sure. I don't know, because he was like, well, you know, God has chosen people and elected people, but you don't know who he's chosen, so you don't know that you are necessarily predestined, or that anyone can know that. I think that's what he was trying to say.
Yeah.
Which kind of gets around the problem, but at the same time, I don't know. I think our ways of thinking about it cause more problems than they should. Because, I mean, obviously, it's in the Bible. There is, like, people who have free choice, and there are, predestined portions. I think it's kind of a perspective thing.
And plus,
like, how we see it as humans versus how God sees it as God.
You also have to accept an all-knowing, all-powerful being above you. And for some people, that's an easier thing to think about because they don't need to, because they've either blindly or through years of worship and studying put their faith in that. But for some people who are looking into it, it's very, very hard to imagine something on that scale. Because if you accept there's an all-knowing, all-powerful being, then it makes kind of the gate to entry a little easier. Whereas someone like me, who I believe in a higher power, but not necessarily an omnipresent being.
Yeah.
So for me, thinking about Calvinist theology is a lot tougher to swallow than, say, someone who is a Christian and is strong in their faith and their trust with the Judeo God. and with their trust in the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. If that makes sense.
Yeah. So, what about tulip? Have you heard tulip before?
I had never heard tulip.
Tulip is what Calvinism, at least partly, that and predestination, is what Calvinism is largely known for. So I'll recap it for David since he wasn't there. T, total depravity. We as humans, I hope, tell me if I'm caricaturing this. I don't want to do that, but we are, as humans, totally depraved, and without God, we can do nothing. U is unconditional election, which is, essentially predestination. Then you have L, limited atonement. Jesus' death is only for those who, for those he predestined. I is irresistible grace. So basically, the idea is that if you come to Christ, it's not you that is coming to Christ, it is that Christ that is acting in you to come to Christ, because he's making the first move, basically. And then P is perseverance of the saints. So those are the main things that the main tenets that Calvinism is known for, at least to the general public. So, what do you guys think about tulip? It definitely, on the surface, sounds very dreary, I guess.
Yeah, especially with the language used.
Mm-hmm. Do you think he explained it well that didn't sound dreary, or do you think he's just beating around the bush? Because I'm honestly convinced that, like, Calvinism is not a helpful way to think about Christianity. But I think that there are good Christian people who are Calvinists.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say Pastor Trent is a bad person because he believes Calvinist theology. One of my favorite pastors, Tim Keller, is Presbyterian. So, I don't think these are bad people. And I think many times they might be living somewhat inconsistently with the way that they think about things. But at the same time, we may just be talking past each other on some things. We may understand things essentially the same, but nuance it differently.
Yeah.
So, I don't know.
Also, just like in any philosophy, just different schools of thought. Some are more introductive and easy to come into. And then there are some, like Calvinism, where unless that is what you are looking for, it's kind of
it's going to be off-putting for the average person if you are looking at it from a theological perspective. So if you were to go to Grace Presbyterian and go to a service, this is what I mean. You're not going to pick up on the Calvinist stuff.
Yeah.
You're not going to pick up on that unless you continually go or you sit down and you talk with the pastor or something. And that's one of those things that's kind of implied that you have to either ask or learn over a long period of time.
Yeah. And plus, it also depends on how one's view of self is, in my eyes, because for some people, the idea of predestination is like,
it's a complete,
whew, shit. Thank God. And then for some people, like, it's like, I don't vibe with that, for lack of better words.
Yeah.
The anxiety of choice, I guess.
Yeah, for some people, the anxiety of choice and true free will is terrifying.
Instead of just the illusion.
Yeah, well, that's one other thing he mentioned. He's like, we're not truly free. There's obviously things that we can't do.
Yeah, well, no. It's just
it's like we're limited to what we can do. Yeah. I'm not going to burst into to become a pigeon. Like, I can't do that.
Yeah. And
if I could, there would be consequences which would stop me.
Yeah.
And
so
as we spoke about with free will, we have predispositions. lead us to think and act certain ways. Like a person addicted to a drug, more likely it's going to do the drug.
Or has like a chemical propensity to do that, like a hereditary thing.
Yeah, or a person with depression ain't going to flip a switch and be like, yeah, I'm going to think sunshine and rainbows now.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, it's still you who's making decisions to do actions. Mm-hmm. And just because you have to live with the consequences of actions does not mean you are not free to do those actions.
Yeah, I appreciate the sentiment of Calvinism. What it's trying to do is ascribe a high amount of power to God, as God, because he is sovereign over everything.
Because he's God.
Right, but I think the way in which it does that by pushing things like tulip and predestination, I think it pushes it too far in a direction that's not really appealing to people, nor... I don't know. I don't want to say it's not Christian. Obviously, there is the Reformed tradition is a big chunk of Christianity. I don't 100% agree with the way that theology works.
Yeah. And again,
that's not a slight against the church that we went to or Pastor Trent or anybody. It's just
very nice people, very nice church.
Yeah.
I'd go hang out with the pastor. He seems pretty
I love
cool,
the design.
Yeah, he likes metal, so he's cool. We talked about a couple bands after the interview yesterday.
We should, all the cool pastors, we should see if we can get them all together, have a barbecue together.
Yeah, we should get
a barbecue on the lake.
Facing the Gates convention.
Just all making fun of each other.
The largest convention in our little town.
Yeah, and then they all take their turns trying to convert David.
No, they gotta have a box.
David's just gonna say, "I don't believe you."
No, we'll have a pseudo gladiator arena. Y'all must fight for
David's salvation.
Yeah, fight for my beliefs.
Well, if they gotta fight, I feel like the first two will put up damn good fights.
Yeah, which I'm looking forward to the ones we're gonna be doing in the future, because we've got pretty much all of them nailed down now, so I'm definitely looking forward to the ones we've got coming up.
And all three of us are vaccinated.
We started on one end of the spectrum and went all the way to the other, just within.
Yeah, well, you think we went on the other end of the spectrum. There's the spectrum goes much further than you think.
It goes further on both sides.
The conventional spectrum, I guess.
So I would agree that the church we went to last week was very 180. Yeah, it's a 180, because that was like a very modern low church type thing, whereas this was a very traditional. Theologically, it's a high church, but the service it's since it was small, I don't know if I can really call it high church. And what I mean by high church is just very formal, and there's lots of smells and bells, which this didn't have a lot of smells and bells. That'll be coming with the Catholic and Orthodox Church and Anglican probably. But yeah, I would consider it more on the low-key high church, if I can put that on a scale somehow.
It's like a sleeper.
Yeah. What?
Kind of like a sleeper car or a sleeper PC, something that if you look at it, it's nothing much. It's kind of looks lower, but under the hood, there's a lot to it.
Sure.
Yeah. I was just going to
I guess it works.
It's low. It looks low, but it can be high key.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
This is...
All right. Anyway, do we have anything else from the interview we want to talk about before we wrap up?
I need to listen to it.
Yeah. I'll send it to you when I get it done.
Well, I mean, we uploaded here.
Yeah.
Because we got the good internet.
Again, I like that works matter.
Oh yeah, the to become a Christian, it's not just faith. It's essentially, he was saying faith plus works, but he was like, well, some people don't like that language, so it's like, I remember today he mentioned in the sermon, he sneakily mentioned faith and service. He didn't say the word
that's
works.
Like some people don't like calling it a sanctuary or
it's because and I asked him, I asked him, because he gave us a little walk around the church yesterday, and I was like, is this kind of he's like, sometimes we call this the worship space. I call it the sanctuary. Some people don't like that. And I asked him why that was. I was like, is this kind of like an anti-Catholic type thing? And he's like, yeah. So there's a lot of that within Protestantism, as we can tell so far, and we'll be able to tell in the future.
Ew, Catholic.
So there is just a propensity within the seams of any type of Protestant church that's going to have some kind of allergy to traditionalism and to Catholicism. But that is more prevalent in certain churches than others. As we saw today, there wasn't as much of an allergy to tradition, for example. But yeah, any other concluding thoughts before we wrap it up?
I enjoyed the interview, enjoyed the little tour. I like him as from meeting him, I like him as a person. And I enjoy, even though I may disagree with some things, enjoy the effort he puts into understanding them in the historical context. Which, I'm a history nut.
It's going to appeal to you.
It's nice to be welcomed in a place. Even though we were the only new people there, and we were some of the youngest people there. Yeah, it didn't feel.
There were a lot of children.
Yeah, which was something he's big on, is families in the church.
Yeah, I think the interview went well. I think he had very well thought out answers, and I appreciated him obviously giving the time and giving us a tour and just being so welcome for us to come and talk to him. And then the service was good. It was very traditional, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm saying that is different from what we went to last week. I'm just making an observation, which I like. I think there's value in that. And
and I mean, different demographics.
Yeah, I like you said, I like him as a person. I like him as a pastor. Obviously, we're going to disagree on a couple things here and there, but yeah, I think it was overall pretty good.
And he didn't shy away from disagreeing, and he didn't shun for disagreeing.
Right.
Which I know some people, when they reach, and also him being a younger guy, he seems more open to discussions like that.
Right.
Which is something that, as we brought up before, that's why we started this podcast, was to open those discussions and to kind of show people differences in schools of thoughts and nuances and things.
Yeah.
Which, shout out Pastor Trent for welcoming us in.
Yeah, shout out to Pastor Trent.
Even a filthy agnostic and a filthy atheist like him. It's always nice. Always appreciated.
Yeah.
And I only had a couple people stare at me for my piercings, which was interesting.
Well, they didn't judge David for his Jesus hair.
No.
Well, there was a guy with a beard longer than your hair, so.
Yeah. So the pastor did say nice hair.
Oh, did he?
Yeah. Well, he said nice hair. Nice no hair.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, nice kind of hair.
Yeah, well, thanks, Pastor Trent.
But everyone else being seated already when we came in, for the most part.
Yeah.
Also, real quick, shout out to him for not stopping when that kid made that loud noise behind us coming back from the bathroom.
Yeah.
He's just mid-sentence here, bang. He just keeps on. Bang. That's not going to faze him.
Yeah.
And he handled the crying babies well.
Yeah.
The little kid in front of me was having a ball with his toy and his goldfish. Just playing with it on the floor.
Yeah.
It was an experience.
It was cool. Yeah.
And it was real peaceful.
Yeah. Really low key, but cool. All right.
Anybody got else anything to add?
And David, do you have anything? No? Any other final thoughts?
No, nice. Quite quaint.
Cool.
Yeah. Close, kind of. But with the closeness, you get more intimacy.
Right. Well, next week, we're going to have a very, hopefully, interesting interview. We are interviewing a Pentecostal pastor. So look forward to that, because that one's going to be interesting. And then we'll be going on to Pentecostal church the week after, so that'll be interesting. We'll be holy rollers and speaking in tongues.
Where's my snake?
Stop.
Time for me to learn ancient Aramaic.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna fall on the floor and start
Someone
foaming at the mouth.
The bad thing, someone will probably actually know ancient Aramaic. Be like, he's just like listing a Taco Bell menu.
All right. Well,
Is this a System of a Down song?
Not Armenian.
all right. Well, I think that's about it. Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. If you got comments, questions, concerns, contact us at facingthegatespod@gmail.com.
Yep. Shout out to all the pastors that
Yeah, thanks
have
for
talked to us and will talk to us, because
Yeah.
no matter what, it's a nice conversation.
yeah, it's been fun.
It's been real.
It's been fun. It's been real. It's been real
It's
fun.
been real fun.
Yep.
We'll see you guys next week.
Yeah, see you guys then.